This is baby Sonic, and this is adult Sonic. Fast, powerful, uncontrollable. He destroys everything around him, and I can no longer stop him. Today, I'm going to show you how it all began, how I raised him from zero, how I fed him, played with him, developed his abilities, and the exact moment when everything went out of control. In the first days, he was completely helpless. He could suddenly accelerate and immediately lose his balance. After a few attempts to walk across the room, he would get tired and curl up on a blanket. In those moments, he didn't look like the fastest hedgehog in the world. He looked like an ordinary baby who needed care. I decided to start with nutrition. If he was going to grow and become stronger, he needed energy. I cut up a few different foods and began testing what might suit him. First, I gave him a small piece of watermelon, carefully placed on a fork. He looked at it cautiously, sniffed, stepped back slightly, then gently licked it. A second later, he was eagerly biting into the juicy flesh. Juice ran down his muzzle and he was clearly enjoying it. He liked the watermelon. You could tell by the way he jumped and made a short, happy dash across the room. Then I tried giving him a piece of apple, also on a fork. His reaction was different. At first, he just stared at it, as if evaluating it. He carefully tasted it, chewed, and froze. He didn't like it as much as the watermelon, but he finished it, without enthusiasm, but calmly. After that, he didn't speed up, he just sat down and started licking his paws. Third, I offered him a piece of boiled egg. As soon as I brought the fork closer, he sharply tilted his head and jumped back. He tried it and immediately grimaced. The next second, he made a lightning-fast dash and ended up at the other end of the room, clearly showing that it wasn't to his taste. He completely rejected the egg. That's how I began to understand his preferences. He liked something juicy and sweet. Every time I brought the fork closer, he would first look at it carefully, as if analyzing it. Sometimes he would approach on his own. Sometimes he would run away. But with each day, he became less afraid and trusted me more. After eating, he became especially active. I started playing with him, rolling soft balls across the floor, tossing light rings. At first, he just watched, but then he began outrunning the objects, making short bursts of speed and returning back. Sometimes he miscalculated and ran into a wall, but gradually his movements became more precise. Realizing that an ordinary room was no longer enough for him, I built a full terrarium, a space where he could live and train. Inside, I created a circular track with soft walls so he wouldn't injure himself during collisions. The floor was elastic, cushioning falls. In one section, I set up an area with grass and sand for resting. In another, simple obstacles and tunnels so he could learn to control his speed. It became his home, his safe environment. At that time, it seemed to me that I was doing everything right. Feeding him, playing with him, developing him, creating the right conditions. I watched him grow, watched his movements become more confident, watched as a helpless baby gradually turned into something much faster. I didn't yet understand that along with trust, a power was growing, a power that one day would be impossible to hold back.
The first weeks passed surprisingly calmly. We gradually developed a clear rhythm of life. In the mornings, I fed him, already knowing that juicy watermelon gave him an instant surge of energy, that he ate apple calmly and without much enthusiasm, and that he almost ignored anything unsweetened. During the day, we played and trained in his terrarium, and in the evening, he would retreat to the grass and sand area, curl up into a ball, and fall asleep almost instantly, as if he had completely discharged himself over the course of the day. But the changes were happening faster than I had expected. His quills noticeably lengthened and became stiffer. His legs grew stronger, and his movements stopped being clumsy. He no longer fell after a sudden start and didn't crash into walls on turns anymore. If before his bursts of speed were chaotic, now he entered turns at precise angles as if instinctively sensing the trajectory. His running had developed technique. I began gradually complicating his space. The terrarium gained steeper inclines, longer tunnels, and small barriers. At first, he cautiously studied the changes, slowing down before new elements as if calculating the distance. but within a few days, he was completing the entire circuit without a single mistake. One day, he ran the full route without touching a single obstacle and stopped exactly in the center, as if aware of his own progress. That was the first moment I felt the Iwogo, unease. He no longer looked like a child. He had become faster, much faster. I began noticing strange details. When he made several intense laps in a row, the air inside the terrarium began to vibrate noticeably. Light objects on the shelves shifted a few centimeters. The sand in the resting area twisted into small spirals, as if caught in a miniature vortex. This was no longer just movement. It was force affecting the surrounding space. That's when I decided to take him outside for the first time. At first, it was just a closed courtyard. I held him in my arms because I wasn't sure how he would behave outside familiar walls. He looked around tensely, picking up new sounds and smells. When I carefully set him down on the ground, he froze for a few seconds, then made a short dash. The grass flattened under his paws and he instantly appeared by the fence. I barely managed to call him before he made another leap. In open space, his speed felt different, freer, more powerful. But at that time, he still returned to me at the first call. Over time, the walks became regular. The park, an empty sports field, a long asphalt path. At first, he ran short distances, then began making wide arcs as if testing the limits of range. I could see how much he enjoyed open space, and at the same time, I understood that controlling him there was harder. It was after one of those walks that things first went wrong. That evening, as usual, I gave him a piece of watermelon. He ate it with his usual enthusiasm, joyfully accelerated and headed toward the terrarium. I didn't think much of it. Sweets always gave him a boost. But this time, his acceleration was different, deeper, more powerful. He made one lap, then a second, then a third. With each lap, the speed increased. I could no longer see him clearly, only a blue blurred line. A low hum filled the room, gradually growing louder. The walls of the terrarium began to shake, and the flooring vibrated under my feet. I called his name, but he didn't respond. He didn't look angry or frightened. He had simply disappeared into speed completely, into a state where motion becomes the only reality. The air inside began twisting into a dense current. The sand lifted into a vortex. Several structural elements creaked under the strain. And then, on one of the turns, he slipped out of trajectory. Too fast. He didn't make it. The soft wall absorbed the impact, but the impulse was too strong. One of the panels tore loose and fell to the floor with a dull crack. Silence filled the room. He stood in the middle of the damaged section, breathing heavily. There was no aggression in his eyes, only confusion. He didn't understand what he had done. I approached him slowly. He didn't run, he just sat down and lowered his head. At that moment, I clearly realized he was developing faster than I could adapt his environment. This was no longer just a fast pet. It was a force beginning to exceed the limits of space. After that, I changed the training. Now we practiced not accelerating, but stopping. Short sprints with abrupt braking on command. At first, he didn't understand the task. He would run extra meters, get irritated, sometimes start racing around chaotically as if protesting the restriction. It was his adolescent phase. He became more stubborn. He could snatch a piece of food off the fork before I could say anything. He could start without a signal. Speed stopped being just an ability, it became part of his character. And I noticed another pattern. The more nervous he got, the faster he was. One night, I woke up to a strange noise. I walked into the room and saw him racing around the terrarium in complete darkness. No game, no command, just running. Too fast, too sharp, as if he were running from something invisible. And that was the first time I truly wondered, what will happen when he finally outgrows the space? What will happen if one day the soft walls can't hold? And will I be able to stop him then? After that night, I no longer felt the same sense of calm. The terrarium, which once seemed like a carefully designed and safe environment, now looked like a temporary structure, not built for what Sonic was becoming. He continued to grow, and the changes were becoming more and more noticeable. His movements turned precise and economical, without unnecessary restlessness. He no longer accelerated impulsively.
It was as if he accumulated speed, as though he understood it was a resource that could be measured and controlled. Sometimes he would stand motionless in the center of the space, focused and still, and then suddenly burst into motion, testing his own limits. I decided to take him out again, this time to a more open area outside the city. It was a long asphalt road stretching into the distance, surrounded by fields and almost no obstacles. I wanted to give him the space he lacked at home. In the first few minutes, everything looked perfect. He moved in wide arcs, returned to me, maintained control. His speed was impressive, but manageable. For a moment, I even thought my worries had been exaggerated. The situation changed instantly when the sound of a passing car echoed in the distance. The hum of the engine broke the silence. Sonic tensed sharply, and in the next second, he launched forward. His acceleration was so abrupt that the air around him seemed to clap. He disappeared with such speed that within seconds, he became a thin blue line on the horizon. I knew catching him was impossible, but I still ran forward, driven more by instinct than logic. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of sudden braking. It wasn't a crash, but a powerful friction against the surface. When I reached the bend in the road, I saw long dark streaks on the asphalt, as if something with tremendous force had tried to stop. Sonic stood farther ahead, breathing heavily, the air around him still slightly trembling with residual energy. That was the first time I truly saw him as an adult. He was no longer a frightened baby or a teenager playing with speed. He was a being capable of exceeding control in a single second. We returned home without unnecessary movement. That evening, he didn't run or show his usual activity. He sat in the resting area and stared at a single point for a long time. I didn't know what was happening in his mind, but I felt that something greater than physical strength was building inside him. In the following days, I tried to tighten the routine. Training became more structured, with emphasis on control and braking. I introduced clear start and stop signals, made the exercises more complex. Sometimes he responded perfectly, showing full understanding of the task. Other times he ignored the signals and continued moving according to his own logic. His independence grew along with his speed. The final turning point happened one evening that at first seemed no different from the others. After feeding, he calmly stepped into the center of the terrarium and froze. His body was tense, movements restrained. Then he began to run. At first slowly, almost cautiously, then faster. With each lap, the acceleration became denser, heavier. I could see the soft walls beginning to bend under the pressure of the air current. Objects outside the terrarium vibrated, books on the shelves trembled, a lamp swayed. The speed kept increasing. He no longer looked like a moving body, just a continuous blue ring. The air filled with a sharp whistle, and it became hard to breathe in the room. The strain on the structure increased with every second. At some point, one of the sections failed. The fastening snapped, a panel flew aside, and the surge of energy burst outward. Without reducing speed, Sonic crossed the boundary of his space. Now he was moving throughout the entire room. Chairs overturned, light objects crashed to the floor, curtains lifted violently under the powerful air current. This wasn't a chaos born of anger. It was the result of uncontrolled force. He was inside the speed, completely immersed in it. I stepped into the center of the room and simply stopped. No sudden movements, no attempt to intercept him. After a few seconds, the trajectory of his motion changed. The ring widened, then the speed gradually began to decrease. First, a blurred silhouette appeared, then his outline became clearer. He stopped in front of me, breathing heavily. His body trembled not from exhaustion, but from overload. There was no aggression in his gaze, only confusion. In that moment, I finally understood that the problem wasn't the terrarium or the training system. He had stopped being just a pet that could be developed and guided through standard methods. He became a force growing faster than any limitation. And if I don't find a way to teach him to control himself on a deeper level, one day he will exceed not only the walls of the room, but my influence as well. And then bringing him back will be impossible.